We are answering your Dynasty questions on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Welcome to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, how's it going today?
It's going great. Hey, my Steelers are on a 2-game winning streak. They're ready to take the league by storm. Look out, KC, Buffalo, Philly. I mean, here they come. How's life with you?
It's pretty good. I was thinking about the Steelers today as well. It wasn't that long ago. We were having conversations suggesting maybe they were the worst team in the league. They're certainly not in that conversation anymore. And I even heard some playoff talk that what are the scenarios for the Steelers to sneak into the playoffs? I don't think that's going to happen this year, but definitely feels a lot better than it did a few weeks ago up in your area, I'm sure.
Absolutely. If they were in the NFC, it might be a conversation.
Yeah, no kidding. While we're on the Steelers topic, is the assumption there that Kenny Pickett is the man moving forward? I mean,
yes,
from a fantasy standpoint, he obviously hasn't put up good numbers, but of course that doesn't always matter in real life. So he's the guy, no question.
Yes. I mean, At least for the next year or so. I mean, they will not draft one or address the position in any way. My co-host and I, who do the drive for Steelers.com, used to find it laughable when, we get questions like, when the Steelers pick in the top 5, should they take Stroud? I'm like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Neither is going to happen.
Neither one. They're not going to have a top 5 pick this season, it seems.
Right.
Well, Matt, it is Tuesday. We always talk Dynasty transactions on Tuesday, but we're kind of at a weird point in the season. Most leagues have 1 week left of regular season action. And there's probably a few waiver wire targets to look at, mainly due to those injuries. It was another rough week for injuries in the NFL. So certainly stay active on your waiver wire as the regular season winds down. A lot of leagues, I know trade deadlines have been a hot topic the past few weeks. Many leagues still have trade deadlines and others have moved away from that. But I'm definitely not seeing as many trade questions on Twitter or anywhere else. So I think trading has certainly slowed down for sure.
Yeah.
So, Matt, I thought today would be a good time to take some questions from some of our listeners. I asked for these questions on Twitter. We got some good ones. We used to do this all the time, and it was always good to hear from the people who are checking out the show and supporting us. And they always gave us some good things to talk about. That's happened again today. So we're going to try to answer as many of these questions as we can.
I like it.
Matt, first question comes from Raul, I believe. I hope I didn't butcher that one. It's at RF_burrito on Twitter. He says, what would be your strategy with Javonte Williams this offseason? Do we bank on talent, hope he comes back, or do we trade him once we get some positive news? Matt, we talked a lot about Javonte Williams this year, considering that he hasn't played in a couple months now, but he was definitely a favorite of yours. He was honestly struggling before the injury. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And
not the best offense.
That Broncos offense has obviously struggled as well. You look ahead to next year and there's still going to be, it feels like, a lot of questions. Is there going to be a new coaching staff? I don't think there's going to be a new quarterback. They're certainly in some cap and financial issues with that trade and with the contract they gave Russell Wilson. So I don't know. What are your feelings on Javonte Williams right now? And then we'll talk some of the value things.
Yeah, it's coincidence that someone asked about him because one of my leagues that I'm kind of out of the race at this point, not that really matters, but I had gotten offers for Williams. And the offer was Deontay Johnson, who I think is somewhat of a buy low now, but is frustrating. It looked like probably the 10th first pick in the first round, something like that later, but could end up being the Super Bowl champ, and a very early third. And as I often do, I texted you. Yep. What do you think of this deal? Which is a wonderful resource. I wish all of you out there had it. In a way, I guess you do.
My DMs are open.
There you go. And I thought you had wonderful advice, especially on this player, in that your response was not bad, but I bet you get more in the offseason. And I think that's exactly right. Right now, it probably isn't a great time to move him. I love the talent. I hate the nature of the injury. I hate that Russell Wilson's going to be their quarterback. So he is a sell for me, but not right this minute. I'd wait.
And that's where I am with Javonte Williams as well. As you said there, we've already seen kind of the trajectory with Javonte Williams starting to gain some value again. We're going to talk about new December ADP on tomorrow's show, but just a little sneak peek for Williams. He's a 5th rounder in that ADP, but his value was all over the place. He was drafted as high as 16 overall. He was drafted in the 3rd, 4th round range, ends up as a 5th rounder when it averages out. So, if I can get that 2nd round valuation from in a trade, I'm certainly doing that. I did check out the DLF Dynasty Trade Finder. Several interesting deals with Williams that have all taken place in the past week or so. Even up for Derrick Henry, even up for Chris Godwin. If you've got a team that is a contender and you've held Javonte Williams this whole time, I think those are reasonable moves.
Yeah.
Flipping Williams for a 23 first rounder, I think makes a lot of sense as well. Ultimately, though, I do think, and this is kind of what Raul was suggesting here, I think you're going to get better value for him in the offseason. Wait, even just 3 or 4 weeks as teams start to get eliminated from the playoffs, or if they miss the playoffs, they're immediately looking forward to 2023. And it's like all the worries of the current season, including serious injuries and terrible offenses, are flushed away. And we have this new perspective that
everything's gonna be better.
Yeah, it shouldn't always be that way. We got to remember and really keep the specific situations kind of in mind here. Javonte Williams is going to be a player that I look to sell if I do have him on my roster, especially if he gets back to that 2nd round range in value.
Real quick question for you, and I certainly wouldn't hold you to this. I know you're final evaluations or anything close to it. How many incoming rookie running backs would you have over Williams? I'm sure Gibbs and Robinson are easy, but are there 5, 6, 2?
Yeah, you're right. Gibbs and Bijan Robinson are the easy ones. I think Zach Evans is pretty easy as well, but his situation is certainly not as clear as it seemed even a couple of months ago. We got to wait and see how many of these players actually come out. We're already we're already starting to see relatively big name quarterbacks enter the transfer portal rather than declare for the draft. And I guess they still could declare technically, but we're seeing players that were I can't recall the defender's name, but he's from the Penn State kid up your way, who was expected to be a top 5 pick, and he's staying in school. And
the left tackle too from Penn State.
That's or maybe that's who I was thinking.
Yep.
Those are NIL related, certainly. So we talked about this a little bit last year, but the draft and the incoming rookie class is just going to be so different because of the changing factors in college football. So all of that said, I would say at least 3.
Okay.
And maybe I'll put names on those later when we have more information. I'm not quite in the range of I would take any first rounder for him, but I would certainly take a top 8 pick for him.
Okay.
In that range.
And it doesn't seem like the receiver class is as good as it's been.
That's the early feel.
Yeah.
That's
talk for another day, but cool.
Matt, when we come back, we'll continue to take some questions from our listeners.
These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain, 100%, that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs finds the right people for your team faster and for free. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. I wish I had something like this when I was scouting for the Browns. That's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. So here's what you do. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's all one word. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply.
Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. All right, Matt, we got a lot of good questions. We've only answered one so far.
Right.
We got to speed it up a little bit here.
Okay.
Next question comes from we can do it. Next question comes from Tommy. This is at FF Tommy B. What themes are you finding in your leagues of teams who have done really well this season from a roster construction perspective? This is a great question. And
it is, right.
I definitely want to dive in more on, especially once once we actually have some league champions and we can kind of dissect those teams. I'll definitely be doing that in my specific leagues. And it's kind of a tough question to answer for a lot of reasons. One, I think, we talk about a full season. In reality, a full season of games of action is a small sample size, big picture.
Right.
When you're talking roster construction, right? If you're talking individual players, it's a bit more, more reasonable conversation to have. So, when I look at the teams that are doing well this season, well, a lot of them have Patrick Mahomes. A lot of them have Josh Jacobs. A lot of them have Jamal Williams. A lot of them have those veteran wide receivers that were undervalued in the offseason, Diggs and Adams and Tyreek Hill. So there are definitely some themes. I don't know if those are necessarily related to roster construction. So for me, when I think roster construction, I'm still sticking with the plan and the principles that have worked. I'm building my teams heavily around the wide receiver position. I want depth at every position if possible, but especially running back, because I know there's going to be running backs that disappoint. I know there's going to be running backs that get injured. So really as many running backs as I can roster, that is going to be my plan in those super flex leagues. I'm pivoting that to the quarterback position where I'm rostering and really building around that specific position, not only to have depth and to be able to fill those two starter spots every week, but because I know in many cases, those are the players that carry trade value almost no matter what.
Yeah, my answer might be a little more redrafty than people want, but there's an obvious overlap. And I think it's real easy to be like, well, find the next Josh Jacobs. Well, good luck with that. I mean, if we knew that, he wouldn't go as late as
that's going to be the conversation all offseason,
of course,
right? Is who's this year's Josh Jacobs? So we spent all last year trying to find the next Cooper Kupp. And,
right.
Some people suggested it was Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I guess those people would be closest to
pretty close
to being correct. Yeah.
One thing I have more value on now, though, and you kind of touched on this, though, are the true no-brainer quarterbacks, even in not super flex, and the, quote, aging star receivers. They're just all so safe. I mean, Adams, Diggs, Allen, Mahomes, I would be more apt to pull the trigger on those guys now than I was before this season.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I do want, as I said, we're going to talk some new ADP on tomorrow's show, and we'll focus on the quarterbacks. And I think that's a good conversation to have. Next question comes from Aaron. It's at FF Mad Scientist. He says, who are some players to target as stashes for next year on a rebuilding team? I'm eliminated in my main dynasty, traded away some usable assets that have no long-term value, like Latavius Murray, so that I could get extra picks and stash rookies that I like from waivers, like Chig Okonkwo. Sounds like you're off to a great start. First of all,
that's the right approach.
Those are definitely moves to make, and honestly, kind of obvious moves to make. Get those guys like Latavius Murray. Players like that have an expiration date, and that expiration date is coming very, very quickly.
Oh, any second now.
Yeah, yes. If you can get any value for them, that is a good thing to do. As far as specific players to stash, I've got a few names here, Matt. I'll rattle them off. You can tell me.
If you don't, real quick,
sure.
I'm glad he mentioned Okonkwo, whose name I destroy. I'm sorry. But about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I picked him up in every one of my leagues. He's a perfect example. Yeah. And everyone knows I like the hot young tight end.
You had to get that joke in there. Yeah, I think we could definitely see Austin Hooper gone from that team this offseason. Have to check on his contract, but he could be gone regardless of his deal, and Okonkwo would potentially be able to step right in. I will say most of these players are just, almost all of them, in fact, are rookies that we haven't seen enough of yet, that I do think there's still some hope for. Quarterbacks, Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder.
Sure.
Both fit into that category. They're almost certainly rostered in your super flex leagues. I would consider taking a shot on those even in one quarterback leagues, though.
And the obstacles in front of them aren't that great.
Right. We could see, it sounds like we could see Desmond Ridder soon, hopefully for Atlanta. They're on bye this coming week, but maybe the week after. Jordan Love was the other stash I had here. Absolutely. And another probably pretty obvious one. There in Green Bay. We'll see how that plays out. Running backs, Pierre Strong, Zamir White, Keontae Ingram. As I said, some rookies that we haven't seen enough of. I'm probably most
third, fourth round rookie picks that haven't quite seen the field yet,
Right. I'm probably most interested still in Zamir White. He was the guy I liked and honestly thought he could have a role this season. That hasn't really played out, but I still have some hope for him in 2023 and beyond. And Naheem Hines is the other guy, that got traded to Buffalo, hasn't really been used much. I think we could see him increase his value still. And he definitely has been dropped in some dynasty leagues.
Yeah. Cook's emergence hasn't helped him. It kind of dawned on me as I kind of talked about Ingram and a couple of those guys. Maybe a good move is go back to your rookie draft and find the guys that have been cut. I mean, is 1 year enough to say, I don't know that he can play? Some of those guys might be really worth your time.
Absolutely. And you don't want to blindly do that necessarily and just grab anybody and everybody, but you're right. That is a good place to start. That's basically what I've done at wide receiver, because 3 more rookies. Calvin Austin, your guy up there in Pittsburgh, he's missed the entire season. John Mechie has missed the entire season. I have not heard a status or a health update on him. Certainly we are hoping and praying for the best for him. Hopefully we'll get some news on that, and hopefully it is good news for John Mechie. And Khalil Shakir, we've seen some flashes from him in Buffalo. Hopefully get to see some more. Tight ends, Okonkwo, we've already mentioned. Jake Ferguson, I like. I believe Dalton Schultz is on a tag. So we'll see.
He is.
Yeah, we'll see what Dallas does there. And we have gotten to see some from Trey McBride. Has not been great filling in for Zach Ertz. But like him, and he was the tight end 1 in that class for a reason.
2 more names I'll throw to tight end are Mitchell in Detroit. I mean, I think they like him enough that's part of the Hawkinson move. I mean, it's a little bit deeper. And the big dude in Indy that is a great tester.
Yeah, Jelani Woods.
Yeah, he flashes.
Yeah, if Woods is still on your waiver wire after his big game a week before last, then go ahead and grab him for sure. Matt, when we come back, we'll finish up a couple more listener questions.
This episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that I'm sure you'll love. Find the podcast block forever now wherever you get your podcasts. So Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and from Audible, of course. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. I mean, he talks about some really cool insider stuff through the eyes of the greatest players and personalities that have been around the game all time, really. I mean, he sits down with star players, coaches, former pros. He gets the real dirt about what happens on the field and behind the scenes, locker rooms, team meetings, back at the hotel, travel, all that good stuff. Ryan and guests discuss topics like, players' psyches, sports betting, playing through pain, being a leader, how to deal with a combative teammate. Nothing is out of bounds on this podcast. So it's available for free on Audible or wherever you get your podcasts. Catch the full Block Forever series available anywhere you get your podcasts, available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game.
All right, Matt, let's finish up here. We do have a couple other good questions. Jacob at JacobDeal_film says, what do we do about tight ends next year? This is kind of it's a broad question. It's a tough question because it's been so bad this year. I mean, obviously you've got Andrews and Kelsey at the top. Even some of the other players who have performed well, we've seen suffer injuries like Dallas Goedert. And certainly players have flashed. I mean, Hawkinson has had some good games. Your guy in Pittsburgh, Pat Freiermuth, has had a string of good games. Dalton Schultz. But just that consistent production has been tough. Njoku, Darren Waller, other guys, Kittle, who have dealt with injuries, and that has hurt their value, obviously hurt their production. If you're going into 2023, let's say you don't have Andrews, Kelsey, or even Kyle Pitts. We'll throw him into the conversation because he certainly still has some serious value. So you don't have one of those three guys. Is your plan to try to identify who's next, right? Who makes that leap, or is it to try to get one of those guys?
Well, I'm pretty sure that I am going to target Pitts heavily this offseason. I mean, I think his stock can't go lower, and just bet on talent. So that one is kind of a side note. I often make the jokes. I love to collect, hot young tight ends. And that's been a weakness of mine for Dynasty. I'll have 6 tight ends on my roster and none of them are playable, but I think that might be the approach now, though, is let's just get a bunch of them and hope any of them hit. I mean, it's that desperate.
Yeah. Desperate is the right word. And I wanted to ask you about this. This is a little bit of a cop-out on the question, but I've seen many suggesting that Dynasty League should consider using basically a wide receiver / tight end spot, essentially not requiring a tight end, allowing a tight end, but not requiring. What are your thoughts on that from a league commish standpoint?
I don't like it.
You don't?
No. I mean, I get it, but nobody would use a tight end, and Kelsey's value would drop tremendously. And I know it's hard and it's lean, but I would prefer to remedy that with, 0.5 PPR for tight end or something like that, as opposed to, I don't need to get one at all, because receivers are so plentiful. I mean, I can find a million receivers I'd start over the tight end 12.
Yeah. I get that. I think I'm probably with you there, but man, it really is. It's frustrating to deal with and to find that production again. If you've got Kelsey, if you've got Andrews, then you're feeling great. But even guys like Kittle and Waller that we thought were safe, they have not delivered this year for sure. That is going to do it for today's show. Thanks for listening. Please make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL, and I'm Ryan MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.